So now here in Susie's budget, she's still got to pay her rent. Maybe she can save a little money on the utilities. I wouldn't count a lot on that. Transportation's less. You still have to eat. Clothing, don't buy what you don't need. Travel, is pretty well out of the question. Entertainment is out. Gifts, miscellaneous, we eliminate. But what we've managed to do is to get her where she's going to keep her nose above water financially, and that's about all we can do for her at this time. If you run your own business, sort of the same message comes through here. You've got a business. You need to talk to your key employees. You need to tell them what's going on. You need to delegate authority to run that business. You need to talk to your clients, your customers, tell them what's going on, explain to them that all the key people are still there, and they're the ones that do all the work anyway. I don't know about your business, but in my business, I don't do any of the real work. That those people, they're going to be there, and keeping that business going is going to make you feel better psychologically. Hopefully, it'll give you some resources with which to continue your fight. And my last topic is a caution on using debt. Jim's advice out of all this was exhaust your savings, exhaust your insurance before you go into debt. And as I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I asked him to look at this, he brought up that with the new bankruptcy law was passed 2 years ago, there's a provision in there for primarily being used by credit card companies that are challenging the discharge of debts during bankruptcy. And the scenario they're using, they're calling is a fraudulent act. And what they're doing is they're saying, look at Susie here. She spent $250 a month on this credit card for 10 years. And now all of a sudden, in the course of 2 months, we have $20,000 in charges. Clearly, Susie never intended to pay this money back because it was beyond her means, and they're winning. And so if the worst happens and you're in bankruptcy, you may come out of it and still have the credit card debt. So if you can avoid it, it's the absolute last resort. And that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Markarian. I am staff attorney at the Cancer Legal Resource Center. We provide resources to people all over the country who are coping with cancer. So that could be the patient, the nurse, the social worker, the parent, the spouse. And a lot of times people will call us with all sorts of issues, and we're going to talk about what some of those issues can be. Some of the topics that we handle in our office, and you can see that they range from landlord-tenant to Medicare. I come out and give seminars on Medicare, estate planning. Tonight I'm going to do cancer in the law, and you're going to see a lot of people ask, well, what's legal about cancer? And there's a lot of things that you don't think about. If your mammogram's not covered, what are your legal rights to that? I need a copy of my medical records. Is there a law that protects me where I can get my medical records? I've just been discriminated against in my job. I feel like I've been laid off because I have cancer. Can they do that? So we're going to talk about all of these things tonight. Some of the topics, again, that we're going to touch upon is the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's a federal law that deals with employment. The state law that supplements that is FEHA, which is the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. We're going to talk about Family Medical Leave Act. That's another federal law that covers you wherever you live in the United States. We're going to talk about FTDI, which is California Family Temporary Disability Insurance. So I know Tom already mentioned SDI. We're going to talk about that. That's for if the person coping with cancer can go on SDI, they have the disability. FTDI is the insurance that covers the actual caretaker. COBRA, CalCOBRA, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. HIPAA, what your rights are under the HIPAA laws. SSDI and how it differs from SSI. I know we already talked a little bit about that. Medicare and Medi-Cal, and then WICRA, the Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act. So we're covering a lot. Starting with employment, again, we have the federal law, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Every state has an EEOC office, and California, being so big, has several. If you feel that you've been discriminated against at work, you can file a complaint against your employer. A lot of states have different laws, though. I know in Massachusetts you have to exhaust the state law before you can file with the EEOC. So in order to qualify under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have to meet these requirements. You must work for an employer that has 15 or more employees. Poses a problem for some of our callers. You must be a qualified individual under the ADA. A qualified individual is a person who can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. The simplest example of that is if you're applying for an accountant's position, you must actually be an accountant. You must be qualified to perform the essential functions of that job with or without reasonable accommodation. And we're going to talk about what reasonable accommodation is. Second, you must also be disabled under the ADA. So that standard is different than under Social Security, which is a relief because, as we've heard, it's very hard to meet that standard under Social Security. Under the ADA, it's a little bit easier. So what's it mean to be disabled under the ADA? You must have a physical or mental impairment that substantially impacts a major life function. And we tell our callers this is walking, talking, breathing. You must either, if you don't have the impairment, have a history of the impairment, or you must be somebody regarded as having the impairment. So you can file against your employer under any of these prongs. If you're somebody who had cancer, you went out for treatment, you're perfectly fine to come back to work, but you feel that your employer is still discriminating against you in some way, you've come back and now there's a whole different job for you. They're regarding you as somebody that has a disability, or you're somebody that has a history of the disability, and you can still meet the standards under the ADA. Yeah, another thing, the ADA differs from the state law, which we're going to see in a second. Under the ADA, they look at your disability in its mitigated state. So what that means is if you're somebody who's legally blind, but you use corrective lenses, they're going to look at your disability in the state of using the corrective lenses, not prior to using those lenses. That differs from the state law, and we're going to see that in a minute. So we said that if you have to be a qualified individual who can perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation can mean just about anything. Anything that does not pose an undue hardship on that employer. Cases going through the U.S. Supreme Court right now show that it's really hard for an employer to show that your request for a reasonable accommodation poses an undue hardship on their company. Reasonable accommodation, I've told our callers, if you're a nurse working the night shift, you need to switch to the morning shift. If you need to reduce your hours. If you need to request additional time off under FMLA, you've exhausted your 12 weeks, you need additional time off. You can request as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA additional time off. Just get it in writing so that you're not then going to be told that you've abandoned your job. Generally, it's the employee that has to initiate this request. So the employer might know that you're suffering from having to work the night shift, you want to switch to the morning shift, but they don't have to say anything to you. They don't have to just give you this accommodation. You have to request it. And there are no magical words that you have to use. You just have to make the request. And a lot of times this is in your employee handbook. So if you have that, you might actually want to read it.